Welcome, everybody, and thank you for attending this Lunch and Learn session organised in collaboration between the Knowledge and Library Services at NCIC and Boost, the North East and North Cumbria Learning and Improvement Community. My name is Ashley Eaton and I'm from Boost. And today we are joined by Dr. Helen Howlett, Lead Commissioner for Children, Young People and Maternity, part of the North East and North Cumbria Integrated Care Board. And Helen's going to be talking to us today about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and raising awareness of that. If you can hit the next slide for me, Helen, be great. So these lunch and learns are designed to be a relaxed and informal space for health and social care staff to come together, share experiences and learn. And next slide, please, Helen. Now, before we kick off, just some very quick protocols. If you're able to mute yourself when not speaking, that would be much appreciated, just so we don't get too much background noise. Please post any questions in the chat, and we'll also have time for questions at the end. Listen with respect to be present. Please pass on, share the learning, spread the word about these sessions. We will be recording the session today, so that will be available to you. And again, please share it on to other people as well. We will post a link to be able to give feedback in the chat. So if you're able to complete that, that would be much appreciated. It's very short, just a couple of questions. I will now pass over to Helen. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm just trying to make this move the slide. Oh, there we go. It's just a bit delayed, I think. Okay. So welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. And yeah, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and the study of it is one of my specialities and one of my passions. So I just wanted to give you a really quick overview, because we don't have very long, just to give you some insight into the condition and the background around it as well. So this first slide really puts alcohol into context. So none of us are an island. We're all part of our culture and our society. So it's really important that we acknowledge the influence of alcohol in our society, because it's not about blaming women. This is about putting it into perspective and really appreciating the power of alcohol in our society. So we've basically got approximately, these figures change from year to year, but not by very much. So we've got approximately 80% or 82% from the 2018 ONS of the adult population drinking alcohol in this country. So that's pretty much, it's a big significant majority. For many people in the UK, drinking alcohol is part of their social lives. It's deemed an acceptable drug. And because it's acceptable, it's readily available everywhere, on every corner shop, every petrol station, supermarket. It's not perceived as harmful. So people do not think I'm at risk from drinking alcohol. Binge drinking is incredibly common and it's a very accepted norm. And actually the highest, or the population that drinks the most is actually women of childbearing age. And it's quite shocking when we do the measuring of units with staff when we're training, that actually a binge drink is 6 units. So you're looking at 2 glasses of wine, which is very easy to down on a Friday or Saturday night or whenever. So, I'm sure everybody, or most of us in this room, will have binge drunk at some point. I've also put the little picture of a glass of stout there, because years ago women were encouraged to drink stout. It was supposedly good for your iron levels. So we've still got these mixed messages and these myths that pervade to today, saying, a little bit of stout's fine. And we're given information about red wine supposedly being good for cholesterol. We're getting a lot of mixed messages from advertising and fake news, if you like, and actually it doesn't have any foundation with the stout and the iron levels in stout are very, very minute, to say the least. But this sort of mindset has carried on from generation to generation. So the UK is the 4th highest in the world for drinking alcohol in pregnancy. And that's from some really good research published in the Lancet in 2017. We're the fourth highest at 41.3% of pregnancies estimated to be exposed to alcohol. So that's a significant amount. We've got a situation where women often drink as much as men, and this is seen with the number of women dying in their 30s and 40s now of liver cirrhosis. So that's a real significant harm. And it's a significant cause of morbidity as well in young women. So we do have small children growing up without a mum because the mums have died of cirrhosis of the liver. So it's just to set some context, really. I'll try another clicker because the slides aren't going quickly enough. Okay, so the risks of alcohol in pregnancy. So it's long been agreed that it's associated with increased risk of miscarriage, premature delivery, low birth weight, stillbirth, and cot death as well. So that hasn't really been in contention. What has been in contention are the amounts, the frequency of drinking in the second and third trimester. So we do know that alcohol is a teratogen, so that even small amounts can damage the development of the unborn baby. Because I think people maybe thought years ago that the mum metabolized the alcohol, but actually we know now from a lot of studies that alcohol passes directly through the placenta, unprocessed, if you like, to the baby. So whatever the mum drinks, baby drinks as well. So alcohol is a toxin, we get intoxicated with it, and it's in fact a type 1 carcinogen. So like tobacco, like asbestos, and like radiation, it's a carcinogen. So it's no wonder if it's harmful to our bodies, it's going to be a risk to our unborn as well. Now, there's a lot of factors that affect how alcohol might impact the unborn baby. And it's a bit like the smokers. You can have some smokers who have lived to the fit as a fiddle. They're 90 years of age, they're smoking 40 a day, and they're great. And then there's majority who've maybe died in their 30s, 40s, or 50s. It's genetic, it's luck. There's a whole, we can't predict. We don't have a label on our forehead saying who's going to be affected and who isn't. So because of that, the only way we can help everybody is by giving a blanket, clear advice to avoid alcohol, not only when you're pregnant, but when you're also planning a pregnancy and trying for a baby as well. And one of the key issues as clinicians is that consumption is underreported. There's a lot of reasons for that, but women are very reluctant to report how much alcohol that they've been drinking. So eventually we got the Chief Medical Officer guidelines in 2016. This took a lot of years of campaigning to get a clear message across to the public and to clinicians to say that the safest approach is not to drink alcohol at all. Before that, it was really vague. It was, you can have 1 or 2 units now and then, several times a week, don't get too drunk. Well, that's open to a lot of interpretation, and there was a lot of criticism around that. And eventually it was changed to a clear message of avoid alcohol in pregnancy to avoid risk. And the more you drink, the greater the risk as well. So that was a really important development. And I have to say, this message was put out in the USA in 1981. It took England and Wales till 2016 to catch up with that, but we're there. That's good. And that message still is percolating down to every clinician and to the general public. It's still not really in the public domain yet. Of consciousness, if you like. Not everybody is totally aware of that. We also had in 2022 the NICE FASD standard. So we were going for guidelines, but we ended up with standards, which is even better because that means that they're obligatory. So that was really good progress, and included in that was about the recommendation that women should be asked about their alcohol use in pregnancy, and even more importantly, that it's actually recorded in the baby's notes and in the mum's notes as well. So there's a lot of reasons why women underreport, and it's not that they're being that they're just telling fibs or avoiding or whatever. There's a lot of
Can I
reasons.
just interrupt and ask a
Yes.
question? That happened in 2022. Does that mean that any records previously to that for maternity or health visitor would not record the amount of alcohol that was being consumed at all, or does it vary?
It varies. We have been recommending it in the Northeast since about 2019, but it depends across the country as to what their practices are. But we are promoting that across the board, but it hasn't always trickled down to every service. But yeah, for the children who are in care now, or the children trying to get diagnosis, that can be quite problematic because that isn't always evidenced in the notes. So that's something we're really pushing forward. But thank
And how
you.
much is it implemented since 2022?
In the Northeast and North Cumbria, it's audited and it's promoted. I can't speak for the rest of the country, but I know we're working on it quite diligently in the Northeast and North Cumbria. That is one of our objectives, to get that into the notes and get it documented.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, so women's reasons for underreporting. So it's not necessarily the one that going out of the way to tell fibs. Just sometimes our memory, for one, isn't wired up to remember everything we've eaten or drunk in the last few months. Some women may feel guilty if they have had alcohol. Some women fear that they're going to be judged. It's a very interesting dynamic between your healthcare professional, whether it's your midwife, your GP, or your obstetrician, for the woman to feel like she's being judged if she reports consuming alcohol in a pregnancy. Some women are worried about losing their children or their baby, and often it's actually our fault, the professionals. We haven't asked the right questions, and I've seen this a few times where midwives have just said, "Oh, you don't drink alcohol, do you?" And what's a woman going to say if they're asked in that fashion? So it's really important that I say things like, how much do you drink? How much have you had in pregnancy? When was your last drink? And be really sort of quite specific and directive with it. And then you're also opening the door for these women and giving them an unwritten permission, if you like, to disclose this information. And sometimes it might not happen at the first encounter either. It might take the second or third appointment before you've gained their trust, before they might divulge this sort of information. So now we've sort of looked at the context of it. The first thing people often think of with FASD is the child with the facial presentation. So the quite distinctive features of FASD. So I'm just going to touch on this because actually 90% of children do not present with the facial presentations. It's only less than 10% would actually look like this child, if you like. So you've got the thin upper lip, you've got the smooth philtrum, the eye spaces, if you like, are a little bit narrower. They often have a smaller head, and there's a few different features you can look for. So I've just put that diagram on there for reference, really. But most children will look like any other in their classroom. And the BMA back in 2007 acknowledged that FASD is the most common non-genetic cause of learning disability in the UK. So there's a significant number of children affected by FASD. Is that Barbara?
Yes, it is. I was just going to
Right.
the facial features is only
Yes.
a small percentage.
Yes.
But is that linked to when the alcohol was consumed,
Yes.
the quantity of alcohol?
It's
So that's why it's linked to those features, and why it's not to do with the child's own genetics
no.
or the mum's.
Yeah, no, I'll cover it in some later slides.
Right.
It might make a bit more sense. Yeah, thank you. Okay, right. Have I moved? Right. Sorry, just navigating these slides. Okay, so fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, it's called a spectrum because obviously it can affect children mildly, moderately, or severely. So it's a spectrum, and it can affect any organ system in the body of the developing fetus. And we know that ethanol and acetaldehyde can alter fetal development. It disrupts cellular growth, differentiation. It disrupts DNA, the protein synthesis, etc., etc. You can read lots and lots about this. And the other thing it does is the development of the neurons, the synapses are interfered with by the alcohol exposure, and that's what causes the harm and the brain damage, etc. And like you were saying there, Barbara, brain injury can be extensive, and it's influenced by the timing, the frequency, and the quantity of alcohol exposure during pregnancy. And this slide's really useful because it really illustrates the different organ systems that are developing at different stages of pregnancy. So you can see, like, for example, the heart's developing between week 3 and week 8 there. So that's going to have an effect on the heart's development if drinking has been established during that time period. Interestingly, the central nervous system, which is your brain and your spinal cord, develops throughout the full pregnancy. So the old advice not to drink in the first trimester, but you were fine in the second and third, is absolute nonsense. So it's really important that alcohol's avoided throughout the full pregnancy. And actually, we know the brain develops up until the age of 25. So, you know, alcohol can have effects afterwards as well. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea, and that's something I just think visual presentations are really useful for helping understanding. Now, most people take away this slide in particular in their minds because it's so shocking, really. So you've got the child with an unexposed to alcohol on the left, and you've got the child exposed to alcohol on the right. And you can see the difference in these two brains. You can see the healthy brain on the left, it's got lots of folds, it's got a big surface area, it's got lots of capacity. The one on the right, there's a lot of fluid. That black there in the MRI scan is fluid. The brain is much smoother, it's got less capacity, the face is a lot flatter if you look. The skull's also, you know, it's not the regular shape of the unexposed skull either, and that's because the brain hasn't developed as it should, and part of the shaping of the skull is the brain expanding during development. So that's a profound effect on that child. So there's no wonder that child's going to have learning difficulties, behavioral problems, etc., because there's literally parts of that brain aren't developed properly and aren't connected properly. So prevalence rates, so now this is quite shocking. So it's at least one child in every classroom will be presenting with FASD symptoms. There's been a really good study by some colleagues in Salford. Manchester got a lot of funding for FASD, which is brilliant. So they're sort of trailblazing with this right now. So they're looking at approximately 3%, and this is a very conservative figure, because a lot in the sample, the children that were known to have FASD, that they knew had issues, were excluded from this data set. So we know it's the children. This is like your general population children. We had 3% prevalence rate. So that's a higher rate than autism. And actually, most people with FASD are unrecognised, undiagnosed, or misdiagnosed. And there was an earlier study by another colleague of mine in the Bristol area, and this was a huge cohort, a longitudinal study, and they had between 6 and 17% of the children in that study, and this was tens of thousands of children, presented with FASD symptoms. And so that was a really interesting study as well. So we know the rates are high. The exact numbers are a bit more difficult to quantify. So these children have lifelong neurodevelopmental issues, and it's actually associated with about 408, I think the latest number is, of conditions that can co-occur. So there's a whole host of issues that these children have. They have lots of physical health problems. They can be very clumsy, so the problems with the movement, coordination, they can be very clumsy children, struggle with friendships, difficulties at school. And actually we've got this illustration here of your average brain that's supposedly organized, and there's a filing system, and the FASD brain's really difficult. If you could think back to that MRI scan, it's really hard for them to locate and remember information. I'm just mindful of time, so I'm just going to speed up a little bit. So I won't labour that, but you will get these slides and you can share them. So there's a huge impact for these children for psychosocial impact and educational issues as well. So like we say, they struggle to learn in timely and consistent fashion. Abstract tasks are really tricky for them. So telling the time or maths that's quite abstract, it's really difficult for them to grasp the concepts of money, for example. That's a real challenge for this particular cohort. The learning gap becomes greater as they get older. So the peers develop at the usual rate, and a lot of these children are quite immature, and their development is delayed. So as they get older, you can see the difference in a class, that they're getting left behind a little bit. They struggle with friendships and social interactions. Organisation is a real problem for them, and sleep's a real common thread. A lot of children will struggle with sleep as well. A lot of the times they don't need an awful lot of sleep, and it can be really challenging for the parents. So this slide's a nice picture as well, illustrating how a child, well, an 18-year-old with FASD would present physically as an 18-year-old. But actually some of their other behaviours are very different. So their expressive language is often really good. So they might be ahead of their age for expressive language. Their reading ability, 16 years, that's really good. That's fine. That's absolutely acceptable. But their living skills would be more like an 11-year-old. So they might be able to make beans on toast and a cup of tea, but could they actually feed themselves if they were suddenly independent, going to college, or had to leave the care system? They might appear absolutely like they should be able to manage, but with money and time concepts that have the ability of an 8-year-old. So you can imagine these are very vulnerable young adults if they're not given the right support. Social skills and social maturity, 7 and 6. So, and I've got a birth mother that I work with, and her daughter's now an adult, and she's got a younger sibling. So the 7-year-old had hit her, so the 21-year-old had hit her back because the 7-year-old started it. It's that sort of mentality that don't really understand the social skills and the social cues. So these children without the right support, they can end up more prone to mental illness, suspension, or expelled from school. A lot end up in trouble with the law. They can be victims or perpetrators of sexual abuse, because if you think again, they're not really age appropriate. They're often delayed. So the age of people, it's really hard for them to grasp. They can end up abusers of alcohol and other drugs as well. So they might self-medicate. They really struggle with independent living, as we've discussed, and maintaining employment. If you can't tell the time and you can't manage or self-regulate, or you're cross with the customer or something, you can imagine they don't often stay long in employment. That can be really problematic without the right support. And there's a saying that girls get knocked up, the boys get locked up. So there's a lot of early or unwanted pregnancy or paternity. And these are really, really vulnerable adults. So if you think of county lines, these individuals are just such victims for perpetrators who want to groom them and take advantage of them. So it's just something to be aware of. So diagnosis is really important for the individual and the family. And there's some data, this is Canadian data because we have so little in the UK. They're the highest users of the care system. So they reckon about 70% of children with FASD will end up in the care system. 25% of those adopted were actually handed back. So these children thought they had a forever home, And the parents who've gone through so many barriers to actually be adoptive parents just couldn't cope with the challenges of raising a child with FASD. 60% have a history of trouble with the law. And this is a really old study, but actually there's nothing newer at this point. So back in 2013, FASD was thought to cost the Canadian economy $1.8 billion. These children were known as million-dollar babies. Now that's over 10 years ago now, so it's going to be much higher, and Britain is going to be facing the same, if not more, costs for these FASD children, whether they're not looked after or given the support that they require. And it's just important to be aware that if you've got a child on your books or an individual on your books, that their siblings have an 80% chance of FASD as well. So I'm not going to labour this point because we've sort of covered it, but there's a lot of reasons why they're more prone to be in trouble with the law. They don't understand consequences. They don't think things through properly. They don't make good decisions because they just don't see the bigger picture. So there's no wonder that they end up in trouble with the law. And there's actually a British study again in Manchester showing how individuals with FASD are 19 times more likely to be involved with the criminal justice system, and they're more likely to confess to a crime as well, because they're very easy to question and to say that the answers that the police or anybody else would want them to answer. So that's something to be mindful of, and there's work going on there. Diagnosis, so it's based on the Scottish Intercollegiate Guidelines Network, and that's written into the FASD NICE standards as well. So there's certain domains that we have to look at that help with diagnosis. I'm not going to labour them because of the time factors. So you can have the neurocognitive deficits with or without facial features. That was a real step forward. And the suspected, that's a key word in this diagnosis, the suspected history of alcohol exposure in utero, because like we were saying before, it hasn't been historically very well documented. So if we know that the mum's drunk in pregnancy, but it wasn't documented, either she would be able to update us, family members might be, other like A&E records, if women have been admitted to A&E under the influence, that record would be sufficient for a diagnosis of FASD for that individual. But there is a lot of overlap with autism, ADHD, etc. And this slide's really useful. It's a document that shows how FASD presentations overlap a lot with other conditions such as ADHD and autism. So it does ask the question, how many children do we have on our ADHD waiting lists and autism waiting lists who are actually FASD or have the comorbidity of both conditions? Okay, I'm running out of time, aren't I, Ashley? I can see, sorry. Okay, we're nearly there. We are nearly there. So it's just about being aware of it, have it on your radar. We are developing a neurodevelopmental pathway in the northeast and North Cumbria. So that's real progress. There isn't a FASD pathway or service in Cumbria, north or south as yet, but we're working on it. There is sporadic diagnostic services throughout the northeast. Manchester has a FASD service, so we can refer some of our children and adults there. But we do have a task and finish group set up, and there are plans for a regional diagnostic unit as well. And I'm probably going to have to stop there, am I, Ashley? The rest of the slides can be shared.
Yeah, exactly, Helen. Thank you.
Okay.
No, absolutely fascinating. I had no idea of the impact. Just huge, isn't it? Utterly huge. So, Helen, we've got a question in the chat from Karen. She's asked, what are the recommendations for drinking whilst breastfeeding, and is this safe?
Well, technically, no, we shouldn't be drinking while we're breastfeeding, and some of it will go through in the breast milk to the baby. We've got to be pragmatic. And when I told this to our breastfeeding midwife, she nearly throttled me, because you can imagine we're trying to up breastfeeding rates. Technically, we shouldn't. There's also the risks of actually drinking with a young child, and falling asleep or what have you. So that's the other issue around drinking and breastfeeding. So we would take that stance, and co-sleeping. So you've got to be really careful with that. But there's very little evidence, and it's probably very, very low rates. And, you know, as a mum, I had the odd glass of wine and breastfed as well. So my children are fine. And if you're lucky and you're well nourished and all the rest of it, and you're not taking other drugs and not smoking, you're probably okay. But the evidence isn't there to say that it's safe. So really the clear message should be, no, we shouldn't be drinking when we're breastfeeding, if we're being totally honest. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks,
Yes,
Helen.
I'll share the slides. Yeah, there's some
Yeah, we're getting lots of
there.
requests for slides. So if you would like to be sent a copy of the slides, please pop your email address in the chat, because it doesn't always pull through on Teams, especially if you're not NHS. So it'd be fabulous if you're able to do that. So we're running out of time, Helen. There is one more question, but I think if we answer that as part of when we send the slides out, because as I said, I'm conscious of time. So thank you everybody for attending. Again, just a reminder, there is a link to the feedback in the chat. We do have a number of lunch and learn sessions coming up, and those details have also been posted in the chat as well. The next one's coming up on Friday, 24th of May, and that's going to be on creative health. So we hope to see you there. Once again, thank you to Helen, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their afternoon. Take care.
Thank you. I've just put some resources on the last slide as well. So
brilliant, Helen. Yeah, we can send those out.
Thank you. Thank you.
Helen, I don't know if you have to rush off.
No, you're fine.
Is that okay? I'd got a question.
Yes.
So I'm Penny. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I work in the Midlands. I'm not quite sure how this link came to me, but it's been fascinating.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
We've been doing quite a bit of work for around neurodevelopmental pathway, and FASD keeps getting brought up. I just wondered, in your experience, how people relate to the label. So because I think with the neurodiversity movement, there's definitely something about the stigma around particularly autism, ADHD. People are very happy to receive those diagnoses now. But I just wondered about, for the reasons that you said around mums not sharing their alcohol intake always, whether that came up particularly for young people.
Yeah, and there is a lot of stigma around it, and that's why it's important. I feel it's important to look at alcohol in society, because it just puts it into context. It's not women being wicked and drinking alcohol regardless of their child. A lot of the time they don't always realise they're pregnant. You know, they could be, until they've had confirmation, they don't consider themselves as pregnant. So that time between conception and confirmation is often an area they don't really think about, and that, you know, that it's just not really on their radar. So yes, stigma is an issue. Sometimes it's as much as an issue for clinicians as it is for the women. Obviously, parenting's full of guilt. I'm a parent. You spend your whole life feeling guilty about what you have done and what you haven't done and what you should have done, blah, blah, blah. So I do get that, but I've done a lot of work with like birth mothers, and they want to be asked, they want their children diagnosed. Women want the right support for their children. Obviously, an ADHD or an autism diagnosis would be guilt-free in many ways. It's nobody's fault, and it's certainly not the mum's fault, etc. But if you look at it in the bigger picture, and everybody's drinking, and your mother's told you it's fine to drink, your partner's told you it's fine to drink, or one or two's okay, then these poor women haven't been given clear information. So part of it's, we need to manage our own discomfort discussing this with women. We need to just be open and honest. They need the right information. We need to be clear with women. And we just need to do it in a constructive and a supportive way. And it's one of these things. It's like you don't blame the women that took thalidomide for their children's deformities, it's almost the same. There's a lot of parallels. Women are just, they're just part of a society that drinks alcohol, and it wasn't made clear. And it's still just, it's everywhere, isn't it? It's at school what do you call the school parents' evenings and everything. There's wine, it's everywhere. So we've just got to be aware of the bigger picture, not blame. And, you know, dads need responsibility too, partners need responsibility. It's the full family network. It's us as a society, and we know that the alcohol industry actively targets women. So we've got the Blue Wickeds, the Bacardi Breezers, the Hooches, all of this. They know what they're doing. They know women have more disposable income, and they target these women. So there's a whole feminist argument as well around this. It's a fascinating topic because it goes on and on.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. And sorry, not to take up too much of your time. My other question was just around diagnosis and whether is that typically done as an MDT process? Preferably,
yes. Yeah, you do need quite a few. Well, there's a few different aspects. The sign resource is really useful, and the FASD NICE guidelines are helpful too. And there's a few different models. There's a Canadian model that the Scottish system based theirs on, and there's a few different assessments that need doing. So you could really do with a paediatrician to check that, you know, the physical health. That clinical psychology is really useful, or educational psychology to look at the behaviours. You obviously need, you know, the history, the antenatal history, if you can access it. Obviously for children in care, that can be really problematic if you don't have access to mother's records. So we're really keen that any information in there is transferred to the baby notes at birth, if possible. But it's a lot of work to do. It's a change in practice and a change it's always more work for clinicians who are already under it. So we've just got to be mindful. So it's about making it as easy as possible. Even if it's a tick box is all you need to get that information down. So yeah, you could really do, and it's also, I think it's a really healthy approach to have an MDT approach, because, you know, it does overlap with the presentations overlap with a lot of other conditions. And if you've got fresh eyes and a second opinion, it's good for your CPD, and it makes it a more robust diagnosis if you've got other people to confer with. And it would develop your team as well. So that's the way, that seems a really positive way forward. I've been up to Dumfries and Galloway. They have a really good ND pathway, and it includes FASD, and that's what they do. And I think it's a really healthy approach for a team to work, and then you're learning new skills from others, and I just think you're going to get a more robust diagnosis at the end. And these kids might have autism as well. They might have ADHD as well. But there's a big chance that there's going to be alcohol in there because of our relationship with alcohol. And also we've had the pandemic as well. We've had people on furlough. We've had Amazon deliveries of alcohol to your door within 2 hours. I mean, how many alcohol exposed pregnancies are we going to inherit from the COVID pandemic? I dread to think. Yeah, I can imagine there being a bit of a explosion in figures, to be honest, in a few years' time. I hope not. I don't want to be a harbinger of doom, but it does make you wonder. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. Take care. Thank you. Bye.